All right, good afternoon, everyone. It looks like a lot of people have filtered in. Welcome to native plant propagation and winter sowing. This should be exciting. I'm excited. So my name is Kelly Wenzel. I'm the ANJEE president. Also with us today is our treasurer, Rick Lear, as co-host. And we're excited to bring to you Native Plant Propagation for Beginners, the Winter Sowing Method, as part of ANJEE's 38th Winter Conference. A special thank you to our conference sponsors, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, an anonymous donor who is a friend of science and environmental education in New Jersey, and the Institute for Natural History Arts. I cannot get that right. We'd also like to thank our keynote speaker, Nigerian Associates, our award sponsor, Duke Farms, and BASF for supporting field experiences. Rick is going to place the link for our YouTube channel in the chat. Be sure to grab that and check out our past conferences and other sessions that we have up there. And in about a month, probably, this year's conference will be up there as well. Just a few reminders. We ask that everyone keep themselves on mute throughout the presentation. I will let Tanya handle how she wants to handle questions and comments, but Rick and I will be on the chat if you want to type things there. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Tanya Sulikowski from the Friends of New Jersey School of Conservation as our presenter today. Attention, experienced and aspiring gardeners. If you're looking for an easy and inexpensive way to grow native plants, this session will provide an overview of the importance of biodiversity, of a biodiverse landscape, seed collection and propagation, and how to get started using the winter sowing method. Take it away, Tanya.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Rick. They gave me the easiest time slot in the whole conference, last time slot on a Friday afternoon. So thank you to all 41 of you that are here. I'll be checking periodically to make sure that 41 people are still in this workshop, and I'll be paying attention to who disappeared, and I'll hold you accountable for that. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I'm thrilled that you're here to listen to me talk about my favorite topic to talk about, which is gardening. And just a quick background on me before I get started, so you know you can hopefully believe most of the things I say to you in the next hour. I grew up, I was really fortunate. I had a grandfather that had a giant vegetable garden. So I was one of those lucky kids that got to keep my hands in the soil, which I am absolutely sure directed me towards the fields of conservation and nature appreciation and all the things I love to do. In my private life, my husband and I live on 1.5 acres in Warren County. We bought this piece of land that we live on about 4 years ago, and we've been working to restore our little corner of Warren County. We've been doing that by removing non-native invasive species on the property, planting native plants, and I started hunting for deer a couple of years ago. So, you know, I am doing what I can to reduce the herbivory pressure on our native plant community. In my professional life, I am an ecologist and a wildlife biologist and an educator, and have used gardening to engage lots of different people at many levels over the years. And for a little while, I was the community garden coordinator at Duke Farms, and this wonderful gardener introduced me to this technique called winter sowing. And I've used it both in my backyard garden and in some small scale restoration projects that I've done in different places that I've worked. So if you're a gardener, which I'm guessing most of you are, and if you are a person who wants to increase your ability to propagate native plants in an inexpensive way, then hopefully you'll enjoy the talk today. I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm sharing my screen, I'll just ask all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat box and just let me know on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being you've never touched soil in your life, and 5 being you're basically like a master gardener. If you could just introduce yourself and say where you're from, And I would love to get a sense of who we have in the room. Can you all see my screen? Cool.
Yeah.
All right, we got a 2, a 2.5. Jen and I used to work together at the New Jersey School of Conservation, and Jen thinks that she kills everything. But the good news is native plants are pretty resilient. And if you plant them in the right place, you are setting yourself up for success. Okay, good. We've got some experienced folks, some brand new gardeners. Awesome. I consider myself to be a fairly experienced gardener. Hi, Pat. I am fairly experienced, and one of the awesome things about gardening is it really is a lifelong pursuit, and you never know everything. And when you can learn little techniques like this that totally change your approach and teach you a whole new way to see the things that you're used to seeing, it's really one of the best things about being a gardener. Okay, cool. Thanks, everybody. If you have questions at any time, pop them in the chat. Hi, Liz. Ooh, she's a 4.5. Yeah, I've got some very experienced people here in the room. If you have questions, pop them in the chat, and Kelly and Rick, if I don't see them, just give me a holler. You can interrupt me at any time. Okay, so native plant propagation for beginners. My goal today is to give you kind of an overview, start us off so we're all in the same place and we're speaking the same language. The theme of the conference is Educating for Change this year, and one of the subtopics is biodiversity. So I'll touch a little bit on that, and I will give you some tips and tricks for winter sowing. I'm going to do a live demo here today to show you how easy this technique is. And then at the very end, if we can get the technology to cooperate, I've got Kelly, so I'm feeling pretty confident. If it was just me, all bets would be off. But I am going to try to take everybody on a field trip, if you're around and you want to join me, to my backyard. I'm coming at you from 215 Bear Creek Road in Warren County today, and I can show you a couple spots. Obviously, it's a January garden, so keep your expectations low. But I can show you a couple spots where we have successfully created some really cool native spaces in our backyard. All right, so let's see if I can actually advance my slides. What's going on here? There we go. Okay, so what is a native plant? If you put 6 botanists in a room and told them to have a discussion about this, it would probably be a multi-day thing. Eric's already making jokes. Rick, can you take care of that, please?
I'm going to kick on the floor and bug him downstairs.
So, if you put some botanists in a room, there'd be a lot of discussion about the nuances of what is actually considered a native plant. I think 2 things that everybody can pretty much agree on. One is that they're species that were on our continent prior to our European invasion in 1492. And the consequence of that European invasion really is that folks from other parts of the world showed up here and they brought other plants that they were familiar with that were not already found here on the North American continent. And they may have been food plants, they may have been medicinal plants, they may have been plants used in agricultural processes. And, for the most part, most of these plants are not problematic. But if you know anything about invasive species, you know that over time, plants that are found in other places in the world at similar latitudes that we have here with no biocontrols can often escape. And that is how many of our invasive plants have gotten established. But the species that were here prior to 1492 co-evolved with our wildlife, and they have specific needs based on geology and the soils and the climate. And that's actually one of the really cool things about gardening with native plants. If you take native plants and put them in the right spot, they're pretty easy to grow because they have everything they need in the area where you're trying to plant them. And the relationships are important, right? Because our whole ecosystem is based on these relationships between the flora and the fauna and the fungi. And some of these examples you've all seen before as environmental educators, and some of them might be new. I threw the pawpaw in there because I thought that might be one that people are a little bit less familiar with. But the idea is that these mutualistic relationships are really important. And if we are disrupting our ecosystem with non-native invasive species, we're also disrupting these relationships. And so when we're thinking about ecosystem restoration or enhancing biodiversity, we want to encourage these native relationships to the best of our ability. So pawpaw is a fruit that's native to the northeastern and actually a little bit out to the western part of the United States. It's a large fruit. It's kind of like a cross between a banana and a mango. We have some of these in our yard, and they have a unique pollination situation because they're pollinated by flies. Hummingbird and cardinal flower, a lot of us know the details of this one. You know, the shape of the flower is perfectly suited to the shape of the hummingbird bill for pollination. Trees and mycorrhizal fungi, this is a relatively new concept, and I think we're just starting to understand the importance of fungi as beneficial organisms for our woody plants and for a lot of our herbaceous plants in the forest. And then oak and blue jay, this one's always fun for me to think about. You know, you see a picture and you think like, do blue jays really eat acorns? But sometimes they eat those little weevils that are inside the acorn. So blue jays will collect these from under oak trees, which normally don't disperse their seeds very far, and they'll fly off with them. Sometimes they drop them, and you know, that's a really cool dispersal mechanism that oak benefits from. And then we all know probably about monarchs and milkweed. The butterfly itself isn't super specific about the types of flowers that it nectars on, but the caterpillar has to eat milkweed. It's the only food plant that the caterpillar will feed on. So, you know, these relationships are really important. And these organisms that have co-evolved together over eons are important for us to recognize and understand and maintain as much as we can. And there was just an article, I think it was in the Smithsonian not too long ago, about the negative impact of non-native invasive plants on bird life. And so, you know, if you think about it, like an autumn olive produces tons and tons and tons of berries that get spread by the birds that are eating them. But, you know, that'd be equivalent to us eating like a Jolly Rancher, because those two plants have not co-evolved together here in North America. And so, you know, we want to provide plants that provide the best nutritional benefit for the species that we're trying to nurture. So again, biodiversity is one of our sub-themes of the conference this year, and it is absolutely worth mentioning that this is something that should be in the forefront of all of our minds as educators and as ecologists. And that example I just gave about the autumn olive, you know, natives support the food web in ways that exotic species can't. And this is particularly important because 80% of the invertebrates that we have are specialists that feed on certain lineages of plants. And what I mean by that is, if you look at this example we have of monarchs, you know, like I said before, the monarch caterpillar is a species that relies specifically on milkweed, but they're not all that particular. They might eat butterfly milkweed like we see on the bottom, or common milkweed like we see on the top, or swamp, or purple, or world, or tropical. So, you know, that lineage of plants is very important. And another thing to just sort of keep in mind is, you know, we have heard a lot about honeybee conservation in recent years, and they're sort of the poster insect for the decline of our global insect population, because people can recognize honeybees, right? They are familiar with them. They know they produce honey that we like to eat. But, you know, there's a lot of tiny bees and even larger bees out there, like, you know, little tiny sweat bees or big, large bombus bumblebees that don't get nearly enough attention for the important roles that they play in our environment. And I was sort of blown away to learn that there's over 300 species of native bees. Liz Johnson is in our in our group today, and Liz did some work with the Museum of Natural History. Liz, you can just put this in the chat box. Is that number accurate still according to what you understand? Liz was one of the people that shared information with me about native bees years ago, and it just kind of blew my mind because I probably, like a lot of other people, just always thought of honeybees when I thought about our important bee species. And this is particularly important because there are some global some estimates of our global insect populations declining by almost 45%. And this is startling and alarming and terrifying. And so I think all of us can do what we can to try to enhance these populations and give them support. And so the good news is, okay, good. She said still accurate, maybe more than 350. So that's pretty amazing. New York City, more than 230 species. Mind-blowing. So cool. So, what can we do? That's the call to action, that striking number about the decline of our species. But what can we do? So the good news is that we have a lot of power to try to improve our existing situation. And one of the things that we can do, both as citizens and ecologists and educators and people that are a living part of the ecosystem, is to try to enhance our habitats, even in the tiniest places, by planting native plants. And if you haven't seen Jaffe's book, it's really cool. The Fluttering Forest gives some really interesting statistics about the number of pollinators that certain species can support. And there's just 3 examples here. These are 3 different species that are native to New Jersey that are kind of mind-blowing supporters of our local pollinators. Purple flowering raspberry is absolutely gorgeous. It gets to be this giant shrub. It's got these gorgeous flowers on it, and it supports over 150 different species of our native pollinators. High bush blueberry, in addition to producing pretty awesome fruit, can support over 250 different species. And the native cherries are absolutely beautiful when they're flowering. They produce, again, another wonderful fruit. And between things that are feeding on the leaves and things that are benefiting from the flowers, that's a pretty high number there, butterflies and moths that are going to benefit. So thinking about, even just if you're selecting species that are particularly valuable in your landscape, even if you don't have a lot of space, if you, there's a lot of data about this out there now. If you're looking for species where you can get kind of the most bang for your buck, you can make some good choices that way. I'm having slide advancing delay here. There we go. Oops. Of course, that always happens. Okay, so here's what you can do. You can nurture native plants and you can educate, and that's what all of us hopefully are really good at. And keep in mind that the tiny spaces matter. And it was fun to put this presentation together because I got to look back at some pictures of some of the projects I had been working on with my students. And, Darius is there down in the lower left. They were harvesting blueberries. Sam and Paula are in the middle, and they were propagating some native plants. And then over on the right, there's a teeny tiny garden space. And if you look at that teeny tiny garden space, you can just tell from this picture how engaged those kids are. And one of the cool things about creating small garden spaces like that is that you can see the results of your work in a very short amount of time. So one of the fun things about growing wildflowers and native grasses is in just a year or two, you can fill in a space that's about that size. And so if you're working with middle school students, if they plant them when they're in 6th grade, by the time they're graduating from 8th grade, they could see the results of their hard work. And one of the fun things that my husband and I have noticed, even in the small amount of time that we've lived on this little piece of land, we have seen a major increase in the variety and the number of species that visit our backyard. And so, when you plant a garden in a space like this where it's accessible and easy for students to see, it's right by those big windows, kids pay attention, especially if they take some ownership in creation of that space. All right, so here we're going to get into the winter sowing part. And I did not create this cute little diagram. And I actually have some additional things that I would add to this and a few things that I would change. But I wanted to just sort of show you this so you can see what the process looks like. And then I will give you some tips and tricks, and then I'll do a live demo so you can see. But if you have any questions as we go through this, just pop them up in the chat. So winter seed sowing in jugs. Basically, the big idea here is that you're creating a little mini greenhouse. And it says February through April, but I actually start my winter sowing right after winter solstice at the end of December. My husband teases me all the time that I am like a 12-month gardener. I've always got something going on. And winter sowing is one of my sort of winter therapy gardening tasks, because I can sit down in my basement and crank up the music and, you know, start making jugs. And I probably do 50 to 75 jugs a year at this point. And once you learn how to do it, they go pretty quickly. So I'll talk a little bit more about where you can get all of these jugs, but basically you get a jug, you wash it out, you get rid of the cap because you want to have that opening at the top for rainwater or snow to enter. You drill some holes in the bottom. Some people use a hot glue gun to melt holes. Either way, doesn't really matter. I'm not keen on the smell of hot melting plastic. So plus I really like to use the drill. So that's kind of fun. And then you can slice the jug in half and you leave that handle attached. So you've got kind of a little clamshell sort of thing going on. You put wet soil in the bottom, you put some seeds in, you tape it back together and put a label on it. And then you put them outside and they should get snowed on and they should freeze solid. And as long as they stay moist, chances are your seeds are going to germinate and you are going to have some things to plant once those plants get bigger and you have some space laid out for them in your garden. So where do you get all these jugs? Because we're all really good environmentalists, so we're probably not buying gallons of water in plastic jugs. And I've got some good sources for you. So Starbucks is good if you don't mind rinsing out milk containers. That is not my preferred method of doing this, because no matter how well you rinse these out, they still have a little bit of a funky milk smell. Is not how I want to enjoy my December basement time. So, you know, if you get desperate, Starbucks will save them for you. Facebook Marketplace is a great place to get them. I have taught classes in winter sowing before and put some posts up in our local group, and it's really amazing how many people responded and said they would save them for me. Actually, there were so many that I I ended up kind of buried in jugs because I wanted to make sure I went to go pick them up from everyone that volunteered to save them for me. And then my personal favorite is my neighbor's trash cans. So I have a dog, and the dog is really just sort of a clever way for me to go out and snoop and see what everybody in the neighborhood is doing. And after a while, you learn who buys the plastic water jugs. And, you know, if you go out on trash day, I have definitely gone out on trash day with a headlamp before sunrise and gone through my neighbor's trash to get their water jugs. The question is, do they have to be clear? Do they have to be jugs at all? Does any shape work? Great question. So they don't have to be clear. Not perfectly clear anyway. And really any kind of container will work that can function as a tiny greenhouse. Some people use those large plastic containers that you can buy salad greens in at the grocery store, the square ones with the flat lids. Some people use, you know, juice containers, really anything that you can find that can serve as a tiny greenhouse will work. I'm a little OCD, and I like them all to look nice, and I like them all to be lined up the same size and shape. And I also really like the gallon size jugs because they give you the height so that when the plants germinate and they start to grow in the spring, you don't have to worry about getting them out of the jug as quickly as you would if you had a flat salad type container. So they're my favorite, but really, you know, anything that sunlight can pass through and that can get wet will serve the purpose. And, you know, we all measure the success of our educational programs by if someone changes their behavior as a result of what you've taught them, right? And this text message is one of those measures of success for me. So my friend Shane took my winter sewing workshop a couple of years ago, and I got this text from her not long after the workshop. She was so excited that she went through someone's recycling and got herself water jugs. And not long after this, she actually did fill them up with soil and seeds. So, you know, feel pretty good about myself on that one. Okay. So seeds, where do you get them? This has been one of the coolest parts of this whole process for me, because I really never thought about seed collecting until I got into winter sowing. And seeds are beautiful. This picture on the right is a collection of seeds that I was playing around with last winter. They're not all native seeds. There are, if you look at the one on the bottom right, that is a wild geranium. That is a native seed. That one's actually my favorite. There's milkweed seeds in the top left, Mexican sunflowers right below those in the center on the left-hand side. Calendula is in the lower left. There's aster seeds in there on the right. The one in the middle is nasturtium, and I forget what the one on the bottom and the top are in the middle. But there's such a diversity of seed shape and texture and color, and they are absolutely beautiful. And this is one of those things, until you go out and start looking, you really can't appreciate that. So it's an amazing thing to do with students, but it's also just a lot of fun to do by yourself. I have two of my students pictured here on the left. Paula's in the bottom with common milkweed pods. And we learned pretty quickly that it's way easier to deal with those outside. And there's a couple tricks for taking milkweed seeds out of the pods so you don't end up with coma all over the inside of your house and in your hair and all over yourself. But they're very easy to collect, and they do really well. I've heard a lot of people talk about how difficult it is to transplant milkweed because it has a deep taproot. I have never had that issue. It does really, really well in winter sowing. One thing to think about is that most seeds do pretty well with this technique, but there are some seeds that have a much thicker, harder seed coat. And once you get into this and you learn more about which ones are which, you learn that you might need to do some other techniques to get those seeds to germinate. You might need to scratch them a little bit with sandpaper. Some people use an acid treatment that would sort of mimic if the seed were passing through the digestive system of an organism to break down that seed coat. That's like the next level of winter sowing native plant propagation. My advice to you at this point is to not worry too much about it and just go out and collect a bunch of stuff and sow it and see which ones work well for you. And I have had very few that didn't work using this technique. So Pat's question is, since you're putting them outdoors in the winter, do you not need to worry about cold stratifying? So actually that is cold stratification. So cold stratification is actually, I think it might be 2 slides from now, but you know, the seeds that we're focused on today are seeds that are produced by our native plants. And so it's important that you expose those to a period of deep freeze, and then exposure to moisture and exposure to a certain temperature that seed requires to germinate. And so that's why, you know, people get really nervous when they start doing this, because they say, like, you're going to put the soil in these tiny milk jugs and put them outside and they're going to freeze solid. Isn't that going to kill the seeds? No, that's exactly what the seeds need to have, need to be exposed to be able to germinate. And yes, coma is awesome for lots of different craft projects. So the seed collection is a really fun part. Once you also get your, you know, your little gardens established, either at your home or at your nature center or your school, you create your own source of seeds. So it gets easier over time as your inventory builds. But if you want to get started this year and you really don't have any seeds to start with, and you're not sure, about how to collect them or what it is that you're looking at out there, then you can purchase them. And there are two reputable sources in New Jersey that I am familiar with, that I have bought seed from: Pinelands Nursery down in South Jersey and the Toadshade Wildflower Farm. They both are great sources because they grow their own plant material and then collect the seed from the plants that they are growing. And I should mention, if you do choose to collect your own seed, there is an ethic associated with that. It's important that, if you see something like, a gentian flowering and you're really excited about the idea of going back and collecting seed from that plant, if there's one or not many, it's probably not the right thing to do to go back and collect that seed. I only collect seed from things that are really locally abundant that I know I would not be affecting that local population of. And it's also important that the plants that you're collecting from, that they're not species that are in any way, we're concerned about as being threatened or endangered or anything like that in New Jersey. So, plant identification is a really important component of this too, if you're going to do your own collection. But it's fun to buy from some of these suppliers because it's great to support our local businesses and folks that are doing this really important work. But it's also really a nice way to diversify the inventory that you have to work with. Okay, and then in terms of seed storage, once you collect them, what do you do with them? So this is not a picture of my refrigerator. This is somebody else's refrigerator. My husband is a really wonderful, very tolerant and understanding person, but if I started putting all of my native plant seed in the refrigerator, he would not be super happy with me. But it is a great place to store it because it's cold and it's dark. And there are different kinds of ways that you can store it. You can store it in sand. Some people just put them right in those little yellow seed packets that you can see on the shelf in the refrigerator. The key is that you don't want them to dry out, but you don't want them to be too moist because remember, moisture is one of those factors that is going to result in the seeds germinating. The way I store mine, this is a picture of the current scene in my basement. There's 3 shelves on my growing rack that look like this, that have brown lunch bags that I reuse from year to year that have, excuse me, seed that I collect. And my basement's a great place to store them because it's cool and it's dark and, they can stay in those bags until it's time for me to sow them. And one of the other cool things about collecting your own seed is you start to get a better sense of phenology. So something like columbine that you might see flower in the early spring, after that flower is done, it produces the seed head, and you can go out there and collect the seeds right, as soon as the seed head is dry. Other things like asters and goldenrods that you might not see flower till later in the season, you've got to wait for those seeds to be ripe and dry before you can collect them. So, it's kind of a fun way to pay closer attention to the plants that are in our landscape and what they're doing at different times of year. So store them, I don't store them in any kind of medium. I just collect the seeds and leave them in the bags and leave them in the basement until I'm ready to sow them. And then once it's time, we're going to put them in the soil, give them water, put them outside. And then that cold stratification is basically the process that we're going to use to break that seed coat. So, when things freeze and warm up, the seed coat is going to expand and contract, and that seed coat will break generally for native plant seeds. And then, the moisture gets into the seed, and when the temperature is right, those seeds will germinate. And in terms of soil, potting mix is important. I think some people like the idea of going out into their landscape and digging soil and throwing it into the containers. If you want the best results, potting mix is the way to go, because once those seeds germinate, that tiny little radical, that first little bit of a root that goes down, you don't want it to have to work too hard. So if you're using a potting mix, it's a whole lot easier for those seedlings to establish themselves. I'm not endorsing necessarily either one of these brands of potting mix, but I highlighted these because they're both peat free. And when I can, I try to buy peat-free potting mix. Peat moss is a non-renewable resource. It's harvested from peat bogs. And, that's another resource that is diminishing on our planet. And so there are alternatives out there now that work just as well, in my experience, for this type of gardening. So one of the alternatives to peat is coconut fiber, which is called coir, and that creates a nice lofty medium for your seeds to germinate in. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Can you guys all see me?
Yes.
We good?
So Tanya, if we have a dry winter, do you actually have to water your the stuff that you're sowing?
Yeah, so one of the greatest dangers in winter sowing is if your seeds dry out. And so you want to make sure that the soil stays moist. I have never, ever watered my soil in the winter. One of the things you remember is that, like, if you're using a milk jug, the opening is really small. So it doesn't generally heat up enough inside that jug for the moisture to evaporate through that tiny hole. And then, dry. You really, in the spring, you need to start watching. So winter, I just put them out there and forget about them, and I've had great luck. Sean has a question about blueberry. I've actually not propagated blueberry from seed, but I will show you a resource. So I'm going to move you all into my kitchen. See, I told you guys my husband is a really understanding person. For some reason, I can't see myself. Hold on just one second. Two great resources if you get into seed starting. I love a good book, and these are awesome. So William Colina is an expert in plant propagation, and both of these books are specifically geared towards the Northeast. So there's this one that's called Growing and Propagating Wildflowers. And then the other companion book is Native Trees, Shrubs, and Vines. And they're big, heavy, hardcover books. They're awesome to sit on the couch with in the winter and read about all the different species that you would want to go out and dream of collecting and propagating. And it's a really nice book because different species have different sections devoted to them, and they tell you exactly what you need to do to collect specific types of seed. If you need to scarify them, which is when you're scratching the seed coat, or if just cold stratification in the soil is enough, or providing the acid treatment or whatever. There's a lot of details in here. So if you're looking for them, that's a good thing. I see a question from Heather about seed starting soil. Seed starting soil typically does not have any other organic material in it to provide, another source of nutrients for your plants as they're growing. So, if you're using soil that's just meant for plant germination, seed starting soil is really meant for you to pot up those seedlings and move them into a different type of soil as the plant gets a little bit larger. The nice thing about using potting mix is that you've got a little bit of time. You don't have to worry about fertilizing. You just kind of keep them active in there. Sorry, my dog is whining at me. Can you guys hold on one second? I'm just gonna go ahead. This is the wonderful thing about working at home. Okay. Yes, not seed starting soil. You want to use potting mix. And then Eric said those books are tough to find. At least they used to be. I haven't looked in a long time, but I believe you. Julia said, do you have to worry about the soil becoming too saturated during winter propagation, for example, if the conditions are like this past week? Good question. And the answer is no, because you're going to put drainage holes in the bottom of these containers. And depending on where you store them, hopefully they will have the ability to drain really well. So I'm going to do a quick demo and show you how to do this. So again, water jug, awesome. There's no lid on here. I took it off. I've got my drill first step is to do the drilling before you cut anything, because you want to make sure that you have a solid surface to work with. The size of the drill bit really doesn't matter that much. I don't even know what size this is. It's pretty big, but you just want to make sure that you're creating holes that are big enough in the bottom of the container. And doesn't really matter how many holes you do. And kind of distribute them along the bottom of the jug. And again, you don't have to deal with that burning plastic smell. Some people like get a big nail and they'll heat that up on their stove and then they poke holes in. I tried to do that the first year I did this, and that was such a pain in the neck. The drill is really the way to go. Then the other tool that you need is a utility knife. Make sure you're being safe. And you basically are just going to cut around the top of, around the side of the jug. It's super easy to cut through here. Doesn't matter if your cut's really straight or not. Just go all the way around. And then you're creating basically an opening. Could have put that one a little bit bigger, but now you've got an open planting container to work with. Might have some little plastic shards in there you need to get rid of. Okay, the next step is the soil. And again, my husband's a very understanding person. I have a big bin of potting soil in my kitchen. If you have not done a lot of work with soil, if any of you are like ones or twos, one of the really good tricks about using potting soil is to pre-moisten it before you do anything with it, whether you're putting it in houseplant containers or you're using it for something like this. You want to pre-moisten it before you put it in the container. And I'll see if I can show you here. You don't want it to be super saturated. You know, I'm squeezing it and like a couple tiny drops of water are coming out, but it's not really, really wet. A good analogy would be if you are using a sponge and, you know, you kind of wring the sponge out so most of the water's out and it's not like sopping wet. I see a question that came up. Are there any native seed swaps that you know of? I think the Native Plant Society of New Jersey has a seed swap once a year. I think you have to be a member to be able to participate. So and membership, I think, is like $15 a year, which is awesome. And then there are some Facebook groups that do native seed swaps. Or you could start one, Benjamin. That would be awesome. I bet you'd be a really popular guy. Union County and Westfield Library is awesome. That's great. Seed library. All right, awesome. So once you get your soil all together, you put it in the bottom of the container, and really like 2 or 3 inches of soil is fine. I usually err on a little bit heavier, deeper, because you want to have enough soil in there that your plant roots are going to be able to establish themselves and get a good hold. And then you want to pack it down a little bit because you want to make sure that you're going to have good seed to soil contact. Sorry, hold on, the dog is whining. Let me go. I don't know if any of you guys have an old dog, but my old dog is a total pain. Okay, so now that you've got your soil in the bottom of the container and it's packed in, you've got a good substrate to work with. Now, there's a couple different things to consider with seeds, and this might be a little bit difficult for you to see. So the size of the seed is one of the things that can kind of help guide you about how you're going to plant it. So in this tiny packet, I have anise hyssop seeds, and I don't think you're going to be able to see them in the camera, but they are basically about the size of pepper. And so when a seed is this small, chances are it probably needs a little bit of light to germinate, because when the seed head drops the seeds onto the ground, they are either going to blow around a little bit or they're just going to stay on the surface of the soil. And so, you know, generally that's true. Of course, it's not always true, but generally it's true. So if I were going to sow anise hyssop seeds, I would just kind of sprinkle some on the surface of this jug. And I'm not going to be too particular about it. I'm not going to count how many I'm putting in there. I'm just doing sort of a light sprinkle. And then what I do is I just lightly rake the surface with my fingers, just very lightly. and then give it a little tuck again, because I put enough in there that some of them are going to be just slightly buried under the surface, and some of them are going to be sitting on the surface, and whichever is going to work best for this plant will work great. You don't need to overseed it. There's really no target number of plants that you're going for in this container. You don't want to do them too thick. One time I sowed poppies, and poppies aren't native to New Jersey, but they are really beautiful. And I grew them in my vegetable garden last year, and poppy seeds are really tiny. They're like dust. And I didn't realize how many I was putting in. And when they germinated, I had like 1,000 poppy seeds on the surface of the soil. And one of the things that you do when it's time to plant them out is you can let this soil block dry out just a little bit, and you can pop it out of the container, almost like you have like a little tray of brownies in your hand. And then you can just use your garden spade to cut it into tiny sections, and then just plant little clumps of plants. And some of them are going to die, and some of them are going to be a little too close together and they'll crowd each other out, but the strongest ones will survive, and that works out pretty well. So that's the way you would do a small seed like anise hyssop. The other thing is I've got some common milkweed seeds here, and these are larger. They're, I don't know if you guys, can everybody see that if I hold it up like that? Okay, cool. So they're a little bit larger. They're probably like half the size of my pinky fingernail. And these I am more deliberate when I plant. So in a container this size, I would probably plant 9 milkweed seeds or so. There's no exact recipe for this, but I would generally, the rule of thumb is to plant a seed about 1.5 times the depth is 1.5 times the length of the seed. So, this thing is probably like not even 1/4 of an inch, probably like 1/8 of an inch. So, I would consider that when I'm creating a hole that I put this seed into. And you basically just use your finger, poke little holes in the surface, pop the seeds in there, cover them up, and then water them in. I actually forgot to bring my water bottle, my spray bottle, but I have one of those, just lightweight plastic spray bottles. I'll give this a good saturation after I sow the seeds, and we're in good shape. Now, one of the things that is a good pro tip to get when you're doing this is to label the jugs twice, because sometimes if you just write on the top of the jug, like you might have noticed in that picture, that writing can fade. And if the writing fades, I guarantee you're not going to remember what you planted in the jugs. And when you get good at this, you start to recognize what little teeny tiny seedlings look like. But I would recommend using a backup plan. And so I use plant tags. You can buy these, they're really inexpensive, and you can reuse them over and over again. Other people I've seen have used, the dog is really a menace today, sorry guys. Other people have used like old blinds, like, the kind that are on your window. If you take them down and take them apart, you can write on them with the marker or pencil. And, if you want to be like the ultimate upcycler, you can do that. But these work really well. And so I'm going to write anise hyssop on here. That's the tiny seeds I just sowed. And I usually put the date, and then I just slide it into the top of the jug. So it's inside. Okay. So now I know what I put inside there. And now we're going to close up the jug, and we are going to seal it shut. So duct tape is your friend. You can use that if you want to. Silver duct tape. After you do this about a bazillion times, you start to get a sense of like the length that you need to get around the top of the jug. It's harder to do this when there's static, and I'm trying to hold it up to show you guys, but it doesn't need to be perfect. You're just wrapping duct tape around the top of the jug to seal that opening. That's pretty good. And you just, kind of smooth it out a little bit, so you've got a pretty decent seal there. And now you've got your little mini greenhouse. So this is it, and pretty sturdy. If you want to carry it around by the handle, once the duct tape is secure, it's a pretty good surface to work, or a pretty good container to work with. Now, I have learned regular Sharpie markers fade in the sun. So Sharpie makes these paint pens, and I don't know if everybody can see, but it does say Sharpie paint pen on there. They make them in all kinds of fun colors. So if you're doing this with kids, you know, they can decorate the outside of the jugs, and they can, you know, you can color code them if you're really neurotic. I'm not that neurotic. But you can do all kinds of fun things. So I write Annis Hyssop on there with the date, and now we're good to go. So if you lose track of where that little tag is, or you forget to put them in there, now you've got another backup. And that's it. Now you put them outside. And if I can get the technology to work and I can take you on your walking tour, I can show you where I put them in my garden. If you have space on the side of your house, we actually have like a little brick patio area with pavers. I put them there. You want to make sure, obviously, they're going to be able to get rain and snow when we get precipitation. It's great for them to be in the sun. And I try where they are, they get like a pretty good amount of sun. But if you put them out in your yard and they get full sun all day, just keep in mind you'll have to keep a closer eye on them to make sure that they haven't completely dried out. But I put them out there now, and then really don't even think about them until spring. And you can peek in the little holes and see when things start to germinate. That's a lot of fun. And once they get fairly well established, once you have seedlings that are maybe like, you know, 3 or 4 inches tall, you can open them up. And if any of you are experienced gardeners, you know that if you're starting vegetable seedlings indoors, you have to do something called hardening them off, which is when you start to expose them to more and more sunlight every day, and you know, put them out so they can be exposed to the wind, to toughen up their stems. You don't have to do any of that with winter sowing. They're outside already. You don't have to harden them off. Once the containers are open, you know, once you're ready to go, you can plant them out whenever you have the opportunity to do it. Is southward exposure better in the winter? I don't know. It doesn't really matter in the winter because, right, you know, your objective in having them outdoors in the winter is really just to expose them to that period of freezing and thawing. And you don't have to worry about light really until the temperatures warm up and seeds start to germinate. So you probably could put them in a dark spot in your yard in the winter and it wouldn't even matter as long as they were not drying out. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, show you a couple more slides. Jen asked if you ever have issues with mice. Some people do. I don't have a mouse issue. I have seen, you know, in groups online that that do this, that some people have major problems with mice. I have never had an issue. And actually the picture on the left is where I keep my jugs outside right next to our deck. Some people have created like a, you know, if you have raised beds in your garden with a wooden frame, you can put like a chicken wire cover on the top. I know some people do, but I haven't. It's a good question, Jen. So once you get into this, there's so many different approaches you can take. You can sow seeds by yourself, which is sometimes how I like to do it. There's a picture on the right. I told you I like the symmetry and when it looks nice and they're all lined up like, you know, nice similar shapes. There's about 52 jugs in that picture. So that was last year. You can also, there's a major delay with my slide advancing. Sorry, guys. This is a dramatic pause. There we go. You can also sow with your friends. This is my best friend, Lydia, and her 2 kids. They came down and hung out in the basement with me a couple of years ago, and we sowed lots of seeds. And Lydia is also a middle school science teacher and has a small garden at her school and did this with her students, and they had a great time. That's the dog that's annoying during the presentation today. That's Bella. And you can also sow seeds with your colleagues. So this is the short case study that I wanted to tell you about at Montclair, at the School of Conservation. So we have typically 4 AmeriCorps members and 2 graduate students on staff. And so we have this space and we call it the Frog Hollow Pollinator Garden. I'll tell you a quick story about this in a second, but if you don't know anything about the School of Conservation, here's my quick plug for the place where I work. So the School of Conservation has been open in New Jersey since 1949. At one point, we were the largest and oldest overnight residential environmental education facility in the country. We typically, our format is 3-day, 2-night field trips. I was there as a 6th grader. It was another one of those things that changed the trajectory of my life. So we do some really great outdoor education programs with students. We also do teacher professional development workshops and research. And for many years, we were run by Montclair State University. When the pandemic hit in 2020, Montclair decided they could no longer support the school and they closed it. At that time, we had 25 folks on staff. Jen Krugel, who's in the workshop, and myself were both faculty members there. Everybody lost their jobs. It was really sad. We thought there's no way, we can ever bring the school back during a global pandemic. But the Friends of the New Jersey School of Conservation stepped up, fought a great fight. And in December of 2022, Governor Murphy signed a bill granting the Friends the permanent management rights to the School of Conservation. And so we're reopened again. They brought me back. I'm the director of education now. It's really just me and a few maintenance people, but we are hiring currently an environmental education coordinator. So if anybody's interested, you can check out the Friends website and look for the job. So it is Heather, it's a great story. It's one of those like really happy stories. So we're in the process of rebuilding the school, but I wanted to tell you that before I told you about this cute little pollinator garden that we started. So this is in a highly visible place on our campus. And at one time, the road that's right behind this space used to go directly through here. And there was a flooding issue. And so the road was rerouted, but we had this little wet spot in the middle of campus. And every spring it would attract toads and all kinds of other amphibians that were breeding because they thought it was a vernal pool. And it was basically a death trap because they would come in and they would lay eggs and it wouldn't hold water long enough to let these animals go through their entire metamorphosis. So in 2019, we decided to create an educational space and make it a permanent body of water. So we purchased this artificial liner that doesn't leach any chemicals that would be dangerous to the amphibians. And we put the plastic liner and then a geotextile fabric down, and we created this tiny pond with those stepping stones that kids can walk out on so they can get a good look at what's living in that small area. And then we decided to landscape around it. We got a small grant. We put some native plants in, but grants don't go far with native plants because generally they're pretty expensive. And so that was when we initiated this winter sowing project with our colleagues. And so when the school closed at the end of March, we were all heartbroken and worried about all of our materials and supplies. And of course, I was really worried about the jugs that were sitting out waiting. And so in June, we snuck back onto campus and planted all those little plants into the pollinator garden. So don't tell anybody, but the garden is underway and, it's a big enough space that I think, we have a nice diversity there. There's pawpaws and viburnums and elderberry and all kinds of cool things that we planted that are woody, and then lots of fun little herbaceous plants too. Obviously the garden's been sitting there for 3 years and not being tended to. So if anybody's looking for a volunteer project in 2023, you can come up and help us get this garden back up and running. This is a great example of how you can use this technique to fill up some of the spaces that you have on your property. Yeah, please delete that. I saw someone ask if you can reuse the jugs. I have a giant plastic bag in my basement that has about 70 jugs in it. And I do reuse them. I usually give them a quick rinse in case there's any kind of fungus or anything in there, but I get a couple of years out of them before they degrade to the point where they're no longer usable. Okay, got 2 more slides. And then if anybody wants to hang in for the field trip, we can see if we can make that work. So this is one of my favorite native plants. This is Anise hyssop. It's the seeds that I just sowed in that jug. It's abundant in my yard for lots of reasons. It's a pollinator magnet. If you walk past some of this in the summer, you can hear an audible buzz from all of the insects that are taking advantage of these beautiful flowers. It's purple. It blooms for a really long time. You can plant it almost anywhere, full sun to part shade. It doesn't have a lot of specific water requirements. So in the spot where I have, it's like actually mostly shade, and it's fairly dry soil, but it's doing great. It gets pretty big. It's a mint, but it's a very well behaved mint. So it doesn't spread like crazy. And when they're little, they're super easy to pull up. So if it escapes to a part of your garden where you don't want it, it's fairly easy to control. And the deer don't eat it. So if you want to like check all the boxes for awesome plants, this one is a superstar. And it tastes like licorice. Yes, you can make tea out of it, which is awesome. So this year I love the idea for an ANJEE seed swap. So this year, the Friends of the New Jersey School of Conservation went to the New Jersey Education Association conference, and we had giveaways. And this was the plant. I collected a ton of seed heads, and our volunteers packed them up, and we gave those away. And I have extras. So this is your opportunity to get some free seed. If anybody wants some, I'll mail you some. You can check your mailbox, and there'll be seeds in there, which is one of the greatest things ever to have happen. Also, if you give me your snail mail address, I can send you a small handout that we put together about this particular plant and about winter sowing. So you'll get some details in the mail. All right. I know I talked up until the end, and I didn't think this was going to take that long, but I told you guys to get really excited about gardening. And if you want to hang in for a little bit longer, we can go for a walk. If you want to jump out, I will not be insulted at all. Jen, do you have another question? Okay.
I was just
Anybody
hoping for
else
some
have-
seeds.
What's that?
I was just hoping for some seeds.
Oh, you know where to find me. Any other questions, anyone?
I just had a thought, Tanya, if you had a like a larger mouthed glass container that you could like reach in and do the soil situation, and then somehow like, narrow the opening, could you use glass, do you think, as long as it was in a safe place outside, or would it get too hot?
I think it'd be hard to transplant them out.
Oh, that's
One of
true.
the benefits of using the plastic is that it's really flexible. So when you have seedlings in there, it's, you can just sort of push that soil block out and break it apart.
Yeah, I forgot about the getting out part.
Yeah. If you want to make a terrarium, that would be cool, Favorite method of removing milkweed seeds from the silk. So good question, Eric. If you keep an eye on your milkweed pods and you get them, they're green, and then over time they dry. And once they're really dry, they crack open, and then the milkweed, the pods crack, and then the coma gets exposed to the wind and they blow away. And I try to get them right when they start to open, right when they start to crack. And if you do that, you know that the seeds are fully mature. And at that point, you can just sort of peel them open, and you could just use your hands to pull the seeds out. And you don't even really spread the coma. It stays in sort of a tight bundle. I don't know if anybody else has another trick, but that has worked really well. Any other questions? All right, awesome. If you want to go on a garden tour, let me see if I can do this. I don't know.
While she's switching over, just a reminder, if you do have to go, please click on the session evaluation. I posted it in the chat before you go.
And there were a lot of great things in this chat, so I'm collecting those, and they'll go out when I send out the video link. What? Can't hear me?
Tanya, you're still muted.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah.
And you
Very
can
good.
see me? Okay, cool. All right, we're gonna go outside. Hang in. Let me just put my coat on. It's cold there. All right. So let me see if I flip my camera. All right, there's the dog. That's a good place to start. Okay, so like I said, our backyard is about 1.5 acres. We have about half of an acre fenced, and I'll show you the fence. We have a welded wire fence to keep the deer out. About a 1/2 acre in the front and a 1/2 acre in the back, not fenced. This is a pergola that we have in the garden that there was a hot tub here, but it was hard to be a good environmentalist and heat water in the winter, so we got rid of the hot tub. But my husband used cedar that was on our property to build this pergola, and then there are coral honeysuckle plants growing on it. So they're really over the winter. And this is awesome. When it starts to really fill in, when it leaves out, it creates a shady spot in our yard. And then at the bottom, there's which is really hard to see right now. This is the fence, if anybody's interested in fencing. Like I said, it's welded wire. It's pretty unobtrusive, so it's not a real eyesore for the neighbors, and it has been really effective in helping us keep the deer out of this part of our garden. And in case you want to see what the hyssop looks like, so along the whole side of this fence is a whole stand of anise hyssop, and this is what the seed heads look like in the winter. I took, oh my God, probably like 1/4 of that to clean the seeds for the conference, and we had 500 packs of seeds that we were able to pack from the seed heads that were left over. This is not going to be the most exciting tour right now because it's January, but we've got some beds in the corner that are full of herbs. I got little arrowwood viburnums from the hatchery when they were giving away natives 4 years ago, and they're probably 6 feet tall now, so that's pretty cool. Here's our compost bin. No garden tour. Look at the compost bin. We have a 3-bin system, and I collect leaves from our neighbors. I'm also that crazy lady going out and collecting people's leaves in the winter. So this is where the leaves are stored. This is where we're actively composting, and we do post year round. And then this is where the finished compost comes out. So it gets moved. And every year we create about 600 pounds of compost from our compost bin. So we've got this cool little trail system that we built to go to the hill. This part of our yard has a lot of garlic mustard in it, and battling the garlic mustard was one of the first real undertakings when we moved here, because as you all probably know, garlic mustard is produces chemicals that prevent other plants from growing around them. So I hand pull garlic mustard every spring, and this year was the first year that I really felt like I had gotten ahead of the garlic mustard. I think we had a lot less this year than we've had in the past, and the key is really to do it before it goes to seed. So this cool little bed that we have up at the top of the hill has maidenhair fern and wild ginger and some columbine in it, and we call that the backyard. That's where my tree stand is for deer hunting. And I'm going to give you guys a quick tour because I know we're really over here, but a section of our yard that we've restored to native wildflower meadow. It's about 1,000 square feet between this little section that we're walking past right now and this section that goes down the hill. I killed all the grass, and this was very burnt. I actually laid down cardboard and put chip down to kill the grass, and then moved all of the wood chips out of the way and raked up the soil and got a native wildflower mix and put it down. And I also did use some of the plants that I had grown in my jugs to supplement and create like little buckets of of certain types of plants. So it's like 26 different species in the meadow. And this is an awesome little spot once it gets really going in the summer. This is another one. It's not a super common native in New Jersey, but it's called sea oats. And it's really a beautiful plant from a landscape perspective. It's a nice tall grass. This one really does well if you're winter sowing it. The seeds are actually, if anybody wants any sea oats, if you email me and tell me that you want the other seeds, I'll be happy to collect and include some of these for you because they're a really beautiful addition to your garden. And then I'll show you this just so you guys, you'll probably appreciate it. This is our shiitake mushroom log setup. So we've got some old logs that we did a bunch of years ago that are kind of petering out. And then this spring, we just did a bunch more logs. So hopefully this upcoming year, we'll have a nice flush of shiitakes. I've got a bayberry that still has some green leaves on it. There's not a lot of green stuff to show you guys right now. These are our pawpaws. So we say it takes about 7 years for pawpaws to start producing fruit. We transplanted these from our old house, which you're not supposed to be able to do, but they did great. We have 2 of them, and they started producing fruit year 6. So they're doing really great. And then here's a quick peek at our vegetable garden. We've got raspberries and loganberries along the fence, and then we use raised garden beds here. A lot of them are covered with straw and mulch over the winter to keep everything nice and cozy. And then I used coral honeysuckle again on the arbor. And we have so many hummingbirds here in the summer that we have to like swat them away when we're sitting out on our deck. It's awesome. And then we did a lot of beds along the side of the house to kind of diversify our backyard landscape. My husband is really into using cedar and doing funky things. So he built this cool trellis on the back side of the house, and it has Virginia creeper growing on it during the growing season. It's probably going to eventually rip the siding off our house, but it was really kind of a cool move, I think. And then, lots of little beds along the edge of our fence. That's my fig tree. Not native, needs to be protected from the winter. And then we've got little peach trees and so that's the quick tour. The front yard is not fenced and there's some native stuff out there too, but obviously the things that are planted in the front are much more deer resistant. I'll show you the spot where I put the jugs. And I leave all of my plant material up over the winter. There's always this compulsion to clean up all of your gardens at the end of the season. But, this plant is a perfect example. Like if you look inside the stem, think about how many insects are probably overwintering in those stems over the winter. So, this is kind of an ongoing habitat, way to provide habitat for a longer period in the season if you leave everything standing. And also there's some cool winter interest. This is Carolina bush pea, another one of my favorite natives, really beautiful. And there's a lot of seeds in there that provide food for the birds over the winter. So this is where I put the jugs. So it gets a little bit of sun, they drain really well because they're on the stone, and it's right there by the Bilco door, which goes down into the basement where I hang out. So it's really pretty close for me to be able to put them in there. Okay. So I see we have a couple questions in the chat. Would beach grass seeds be good for harvesting and propagating? Not sure, Phil, exactly how that would work. I have not tried that before, but I would definitely give it a go. One of the cool things about winter sowing is you don't have a whole lot to lose, other than a little bit of time. If you don't get anything that actually pops up in your jugs, you can reuse the soil. Is it possible to gather seed from coral honeysuckle? Yes. That plant has the fleshy seed on it. So I have not propagated it because I usually just dig it up. It's pretty good spreader in our yard. And so I just dig it up, but I know that you can propagate it from seed. Any other questions?
I think there was one last one. How late in winter can you collect seed?
I think it depends. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not really sure. I mean, I think if they're still out there, it's worth collecting and giving it a shot. Because if you think about it, I always think about like, what would Mother Nature do, right? Those seeds are still out there. If they're in the dried seed heads, then, chances are that I would give it a shot. All right. Anybody else? Well, thanks for hanging in there, everyone. I hope you picked up some tips and are inspired to go out and go through your neighbor's trash. And send me an email. Let me know how it goes. If you have questions, keep me in the loop. I love to hear what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for your presentation. You hung on there for a long time with, you ended with 31, so not that many dropped off.
No, Kelly.
Yeah, and just thank you again to all of our sponsors, and remember to do that evaluation. You'll also get that emailed to you. And thanks everyone for attending the Friday afternoon session. If any of you that are still on the call want to join me in Newark, I do have a couple of tickets still for the Passaic River movie. You can just email me, and I will work out getting tickets to you. Otherwise, have a good weekend and enjoy your field experiences if you're going on them.
Everybody, and thanks to Angie for putting up. It's a huge amount of work. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tanya.